want to welcome you to my channel. I'm observer of anomalous objects. My name is Dale, and I just want to welcome you. I don't know if you're in Australia. I don't know if you're in the UK. I'm guessing if you're in the UK, you're probably asleep right now. I think one of my friends told me it was about midnight there, but you can always catch it after I post it. To everyone in the US, whether you're on the West Coast or the East Coast or somewhere in between, I want to welcome you to the podcast. We're going to have a great podcast. I want to go ahead and introduce my co-host right before I bring him on. Today, my co-host is going to be Rob Heatherly. Rob Heatherly is a Marine. I'm told there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. You know, doesn't matter whether you're alive or dead, whether you're active or inactive, you are a Marine for life. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Another thing that Rob did as part of his career is he was a structural engineer until he was injured. Rob and my friend Shannon, he's watching right now. Rob and Shannon have a podcast of their own. It's called Military Witness to UAPs. Rob also has kind of been in the news lately, especially in the X community, and maybe a little bit broader, but he's the one who discovered the WikiLeaks scandal where the guerrilla skeptics had taken over. I think last I heard it was about 5,000 pages. And so Rob was on Coast to Coast with George Knapp. That's right, the legendary George Knapp. He was also on the Good Trouble Show with Matt Ford. And so with no further ado, let me go ahead and bring my partner in here. Good to have you, Rob.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you. This is going to be a great podcast. Now, let me go ahead and introduce our guest right now. Our guest is Robert Schroeder. And he's the author of the book, Solving the UFO Enigma, How Modern Physics is Revealing the Technology of UFOs. He talks about theoretical development in modern physics, such as extra dimensions, warp geometries, and stuff like that. Just to give you an idea of what he did for a living, looks like he's retired after 26 years working at Hewlett-Packard as an operations and product manager. He's also got a bachelor's of arts in math from Rutgers University, an AS and an associate degree in aerospace engineering, and an MBA as well, a master's of business administration. He's married, and his daughter is also a structural engineer like Rob was as well. And his wife, Carol, is a high school math teacher. And so with no further ado, let me go ahead and bring Robert Schroeder, or Bob, as he likes to be called, into the show. It's good to have you with us.
Dale, thank you for having me on your show. I really love doing these shows.
Yeah. What's awesome to be able to, we can talk about your book, but it's just good to have you on. One of the things I'm learning and I like to do is I like for people to kind of get to know who the person on the podcast is. And so why don't you tell us just a little bit about your life? I don't know whether and maybe tell us the strangest thing that ever happened to you, somewhere in that journey of life, something maybe that you can't explain, or maybe there's nothing like that. But if there is, please go ahead and share that as well as when you're sharing your life story.
A little bit of background. I'm originally from New Jersey. I'm not sure many people have heard of Teaneck, New Jersey. It's a couple miles west of New York City. I grew up there, and I'm in my 70s now. I grew up there in the 50s and 60s, and let's see. I went to school for aerospace engineering, but what happened then? After that, I went on for a degree in math, and I took one semester off just to earn a little money for the tuition. And as luck would have it, this was 1966. The military was looking for, they were drafting people right and left, and I ended up in the military. I ended up in the U.S. Army, served as an enlisted man for let's see, 2 years and 7 months or something like that, and I was in Korea, South Korea, and then my unit was moved to South Vietnam. So I spent 17 months there, the last part of my career. And then when I mustered out, I came back to Fort Lewis, Washington. I had been there before when I shipped out to Korea, but on the return trip, it was much more fun because I was almost done with the military, you know. And not that I dislike the military, it was actually an extremely interesting experience, and I'm happy that I had a chance to serve. Um, but um, but I have to admit, when I was out in Washington State, now I assume both you guys are from the Pacific Northwest.
Rob's from Missouri,
Oh, so
the
uh,
Ozarks.
the Ozarks, yeah. Um, so, but anyway, I loved the Pacific Coast, and when I worked at Hewlett Packard, I had an opportunity. The company wanted me to move out there, but I couldn't persuade my wife and daughter. And but I love the Pacific Northwest. It's just so picturesque, and
It is.
the landscape is just so rugged and everything. But anyway, getting back, so
Can you
that
move your mic just a little bit closer
oh
to your mouth? It might be
oh
easier.
sure
If
can.
you can
Yep.
adjust it a little bit. It might be a little bit easier for
Yeah.
people to hear you. I,
Okay. Yep.
yeah,
Oh, can I adjust the volume here? No.
that I don't know. I know the
Yeah.
easiest, quickest way is to get the mic closer to your mouth. I mean, I've got mine right
And
in the middle. You can just barely not see it.
okay. Wait a minute. Let me see if
Push
I
it
can
more that way. Maybe you can't see it.
pan.
There it is.
Okay. Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, a little bit better. It's just I thought with some
Okay.
people, my wife for one, she's
Yeah.
got a little bit of a hearing problem. So I was just
And
thinking, for
yeah.
people like that, it might be
And
beneficial.
okay. And what I did is my mic only goes part way over,
Okay.
so I kind of moved the
Yep.
headphones.
Yep.
And
Yep.
but anyway,
That's
uh,
better.
so then I we ended up my wife and I ended up moving from we were in Texas for 5 years working for I worked the first company I worked for out of college was W.R. Grace and Company. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, um, but they were a big chemical company, and but they were also in the oil business. So that's why I was down in Dallas, and then um, my wife oh no, my wife was still working in New Jersey, so I ended up trying to move back up there, but the closest I could get to New Jersey, we were married, but it was long distance. And so the closest I could get to New Jersey was Rhode Island, but then my wife got a job um, up in Massachusetts, and I ended up moving to Massachusetts, and that's where I am now. I'm in a town called Sudbury, maybe 20 miles west of Boston, right next to Concord, Massachusetts, where the American Revolution started, and I love it up here too. Um, so it's really pretty amazing. But
We're about
and
as
oh,
far apart from each other as we can get.
and yes, I know the total opposite
And
ends of the
Rob's somewhere in
country.
the middle.
And
He's the middleman
yeah,
up there.
and
Yeah.
but then I'll add one more thing. My entire life, I've been interested in the UFO phenomenon. I've been uh, following it since the '60s, and I can remember when uh, what was his name? Edward Ruppelt, Ruppelt. Some of these rather famous guys, way back. Um, when they had Project Blue Book,
Right.
they had Dr. J. Allen Hynek. I remember I think it was 1967, he wrote an article. He had publicly been a skeptic of the UFO phenomenon, but in 1967, I was in Korea, and I got bought Look magazine over there, and I was amazed to see that Dr. Hynek had come out and said that he felt that these phenomena there was something to it, and I had already been following it for years, and so I was super happy to see that a professional scientist coming out and supporting research into this phenomenon. And after I got out of the military, and I worked, I retired back in 2010 or so. I was still, of course, fascinated by the topic of UFOs. I've been studying science, physics for many, many years, and and I realized that some of the theories that were coming out in the beginning of the 21st century, they have been actually percolating back decades before that, but they began to attract the interest of a majority of physicists at the beginning of the 21st century, and I began to look at that very closely, and I realized that that could explain the UFO phenomenon, what was going on. Um, and so I ended up writing a book about it, solving the UFO Enigma, and that's where we are today. And I still am convinced that uh, the what they've been working on the last couple of decades is pointing in the right direction to explain the technology of UFOs. And I guess that pretty much covers it. And so in the slideshow, we'll see the development of modern physics, and and then we'll see how that is connected to the latest developments in physics, and how that has, I think, is very likely to eventually explain the UFO phenomenon, the technology behind these craft. And
So is this a partial response to the idea that we can't travel faster than the speed of light? Is that because I noticed that that seems to
Mhm.
be it seems to have influenced a lot of people in that sense, that they had that barrier that they felt like they had to overcome. And so I know we had
Mhm.
Mark on not that long
Yeah.
ago, and so he talked about some of the things that you're going to be talking about, and I'm guessing he learned some of that stuff from you as well. Now, the other question I have for you is, you were there prior to '69, before they really, the Condon Report, before they shut down Project Blue Book, before they
Mhm.
dictated, denial and ridicule. And so, take us back. Just what was it like prior to that, and then what was it like, being a person that believes in it,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden, it becomes something that you get ridiculed for, or you get made fun of. People think you're crazy. But there was a period there, wasn't it, before that, where it was somewhat accepted?
Exactly. Dale, that's exactly what it was like. Um, Back in the late 50s, admittedly I was still a kid, and certainly into the 60s, there was tremendous excitement about the UFO phenomenon, and people were not as dismissive back then. Now, ordinary people, the military, sad to say, was dismissive, and I can explain that. I believe that any type of government organization, especially a government organization, is really, if you think about it, a gigantic bureaucracy. And any bureaucracy, its number one purpose is to survive and expand, and that's what it that's they may have been tasked with other goals, like building a strong military or building highways or something like that. But at the end of the day, the people that run those organizations are mainly interested in their own survival, and the best way to survive is to make your organization bigger. and and so what happens when along comes the UFO phenomenon, and they are asked to study it and look at it. Um, Now, many of them, because they're bureaucrats, may not have that much interest in science, and uh, and this kind of looks silly to them. It looks a little fantastic and very um, kind of as if there's maybe a lot of people involved in it that might not be grounded, the better way to put it. And uh, and so they take one look at that and they think, wait a minute, am I going to risk my career, my organization, my pension, my survival
Yeah,
by
definitely.
following something like this? And I think that's what, I don't think there's any conspiracy theory going on. I think it's simply it's simply a very mundane explanation. These people are just looking at it's a bureaucracy, and they're trying to save the organization that they're part of, and that's it. And it in fact, to prove that that's likely true, it took all the way up until Louis Elizondo. Is he the guy that I know, Dale, you were in the Navy.
Right.
And by the way, thank you for your service. And Rob, thank you for your service in the Marines. But anyway, so it took how many? That's 6 decades before they finally it finally became taken more seriously. I think it took who's the lady, the Boston Globe reporter? She played a key role.
Leslie Kane or
Leslie
the New York
Kane.
Times.
The New York
Yes.
Times is where it came out of.
Yep.
I tend to think
No.
that there is some stuff going on. I think there's enough testimony, but I think you're right in the sense that it is a bureaucracy and it feeds on itself. We see that within the government itself. But I think the other side of it, the other reason that they went to the ridicule and denial is because we had an enemy called the Soviet Union, and there were so many reports coming in that there were those in the government and the military, especially DOD, that we have too much attention focused over here, where our phone lines are getting overloaded, and we're not watching what they perceived as the real problem was the Soviet Union. But I also think even today, though, there are enough testimonies, there are enough people out there that it's not the whole government, but there's definitely what seems to be the military industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, contractors. There does seem to be what a lot of people refer to as gatekeepers, and that could be, you said, self-survival. For them, it's profits, it's money. And then I think there probably another factor of people in there that are legitimate patriots that don't want this stuff to get out because they're afraid that Russia or China will get the information. And so we're probably better off. They're thinking that we can't release this, because if we release this, we got to release everything else with it. And I think that's wrong. I think the very minimum, Bob, what they could do for us is just at least admit we're what we already know, that we're not alone in the universe. I don't think that's, and it would. The reason I feel so strongly about it, in the last couple of podcasts we've had experiencers on, and I've had my own, but it's tough to be a person, that's gone through stuff like that, and then people victimize you a second time by treating you like you're crazy, by giving you the funny look and all that kind of stuff. And so I don't agree with that part of it. I can understand the national security side of it. I can understand protecting that. So let's go ahead and let's move into your book.
Okay.
Go ahead and you want to do the slideshow now, or you want to talk about the book first, or is that incorporated?
Dale, could we quickly show the video by Sir Francis Chichester?
Yeah, we can do that right now.
It's only about a minute and a half, I think.
All right, here we go.
It was a perfect shape. It was shaped sort of like a pearl with a tail. And I watched this thing, and suddenly it disappeared. And I thought, well, am I seeing things? I'd had a very grueling flight. I'd had engine trouble, and I'd been waiting for hours, expecting to go into the sea, However, suddenly this thing reappeared, coming towards me. And I thought, well, I'm not going to let it go this time. And I kept my look fixed on it. And it was approaching fairly fast, and then suddenly, gradually rather, it began to thin out, and it vanished in front of me, and before my eyes. It became a sort of ghost. I could see the water, the waves of the sea through it for one instant, and then it vanished.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Jean-Charles Duboc. I am a retired Air France captain. During Air France flight 3532 from Nice to London on 28 January 1994, I observed with my crew a UFO in broad daylight near Paris. This UFO was in evolution, and it looked like this, with a bank angle of 45 degrees. It seemed to be a huge flying disc. It stabilized and stopped moving. We observed it over 1 minute on the left of our plane, surprisingly totally stationary in the sky, and it disappeared progressively. This large object was below us at the altitude of 35,000 feet. We were at 39,000 feet, at a distance of about 25 nautical miles.
Okay. All right. My question is, was that the 2001 or the 2013 press club event?
That I don't know, but you're right. It was in the 2000s. But the key thing I wanted to bring up from that video is that we got to pay attention to the characteristics that of these UFOs, because that's how we're going to figure out how they work. And in both cases, now 1931. Sir Francis Chichester. Oh, and by the way, I want to mention that both of these eyewitnesses are very reputable people. Sir Francis Chichester was knighted and a very respected guy. He was a pioneer in aviation back then. And what's interesting for Chichester is that when he first wrote about his experience, he wrote it in a book called, I think it was called The Lonely Sea, or the Lonely Sea and Sky, or something like that. And I actually had the book many years ago, about 20 years ago, and I got it from the library. And when I read that excerpt about him and his experience, at that time they didn't even call these craft flying saucers or UFOs. This is before the era of the term flying saucer became commonplace. And what happened was, and very important, if you listen to him carefully, he said he could at one time he could see right through the craft, and in his book he describes it more, with more detail. And one of the things he said, he could see the shape and the form of the craft, but he could see through parts of it as it began to fade. And in my opinion, I think this is extremely significant, and we will see that in the slideshow. A ditto with Captain Charles Duboc of Air France. He said if his English was somewhat accented, but if you listen very carefully, he described the UFO as progressively disappearing. So it gradually faded. And although he didn't mention it in that short excerpt there, he also, in other videos that I've seen with him, he did mention that at the same time that it disappeared visually, it also disappeared on their aircraft radar, and it disappeared at the Paris civilian airport radar, as well as military radars that were near Paris. And so at the same time that it disappeared visually, it also disappeared on the radar. Now, again, I want to say I am certain that this has something to do with their technology. And we could, if you want, we could move over to the slideshow, and I can start to explain where the physics that I think is behind.
Let me add one little thing to it. I think
Absolutely.
it's going to be important. Let me get this set up right.
Yeah.
It's the idea that we're clearly seeing patterns, and that's what you're seeing. And I know where you're going with this. I think it's important because a lot of people are talking about interdimensional or different dimensions and stuff like that. But I'd also like to maybe add that we're probably talking about multiple types of species, multiple types of UFOs. And so, so just make sure that we don't limit it and just as if it's all one thing.
Oh, no.
Understand that there's multiple things.
Yeah.
All right. You've got control of this, I think.
Okay. And Dale, I'll expand it here.
Okay.
Oh, there we are. And so that's the book cover. There we are. And isn't this a great picture of the Earth? And
Let me go ahead and put that big screen so everybody can see that. I'll take us out for now.
okay, perfect. And the title of this picture is "New Theory of Earth's Rapid Creation Makes Alien Life More Likely," and the article that goes with this picture. So it used to be thought that when the solar system was forming, that it took about over 100 million years for the planet Earth to um, consolidate and become what it is, or the early proto-Earth. And they think in the original theories on the formation of planets around stars, they thought that it was a kind of a haphazard event, that it was a somewhat improbable event, that it was based on planetoids, large planetoids, like in a demolition derby, as they were all swirling around the early sun 5 billion years ago. They thought that um, they were moving between orbits and they were smashing into each other, and um, and and so if that was the case, then um, unfortunately, the water that you can clearly see in the picture, our Earth is like what 2/3 of the surface is covered by water. Um, they pointed out that these early theories would have indicated that the water would have been evaporated and blown out into space in these giant collisions. The heat would have been so much, it just would have gone, it disappeared into space. And but now the new theory is that they think that the Earth was not formed like that. They think it was actually formed. It coalesced from uh, millions upon millions, billions of tiny marble-sized particles uh, 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 that had like dust from the early universe. Some of it, which was made up of heavier elements, and all of it, or most of it, would have been covered by droplets of ice in space there, and they think that these coalesced, and then as the proto-Earth became bigger, it just swept its orbit of all the other tiny little bits of of matter and stuff that were still floating around. It was like a vacuum cleaner, and so this theory, based on the math that's involved, it looks like it would only take about 5 million years instead of over 100 million for the early Earth to have formed. But it also indicates that planets like our planet Earth should be commonplace in the universe. So I think that's important. And let me add one more thing, real quick here. Um, so most people know that the name of our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy, and the nearest galaxy to us um, is for during the school year, I teach at a middle school. I took that up after I retired from regular work, and I just do substitute teaching. But I always like to get the kids excited about science, and but I asked them, "What's the closest galaxy to our galaxy?" and and that is Andromeda galaxy, and that's about 2 million light years from Earth. But then I asked the kids, how many galaxies do you think there are in the visible universe? And most of them say, oh, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000. The actual number is 1,000,000,000,000, at least 1,000,000,000,000. And with the average galaxy having hundreds of millions of stars, it should be easy to see um, and they think in our galaxy alone, the Milky Way, about 20% of the stars are type G. Scientists classify stars by their surface temperature, which indicates their size as well. Um, and those are considered to be the most likely to have planets like Earth. About 20% of the stars in our Milky Way galaxy are G stars. So that ends up being about 40 40 billion. Um, so stars, multiply that by 1 trillion, and the number you get is something like a Googleplex. It's gigantic. So I believe the odds of life out there are absolutely overwhelming, and I think the universe is teeming with life. And so we'll move on here. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, I think that we have to pay attention to the UFO evidence, and we have reports from at least the 1930s right up to the 21st century, and the UFO characteristics that keep appearing over and over again are these items here, and there may be a couple of others, but these I think are the very significant ones. Um, so one of the things that they notice time and again is an inertia-defying rapid accelerations. I mean, lightning fast. Um, so inertia can be thought of as the resistance to acceleration, and we cannot accelerate objects particularly fast, large objects. And the second characteristic is an intense glow and levitation of these objects. Um, that intense glow has been reported time and again. And Dale, I believe when you described the UFO sighting you had, you described the glow from the object, the light from the object as being very bright. And that's, by the way, like I mentioned here, a characteristic of UFOs. Another factor which we've already looked at in a couple of other cases, is partial or complete transparency. They may be solid-looking objects at one point, but then they can transform and gradually fade, and where you can actually see right through them, and then they disappear entirely.
Can I ask a question about that? Because when you said it before, and like I said, I'm not saying that this is the case, but this is something that somebody else might be thinking, and I'm not saying it's necessarily my position.
Yep.
But what if they have the ability to cloak? Would that look different, or would that look similar?
That's a great question, Dale. I think that what they're doing there is something much more fundamental than stealth technology. Now, stealth technology happens to be in the last couple of decades something that is people are very aware of, and I think that's so. When I do talks around the country, I often get that question. But in this case, I don't think they were cloaking. I think, for example, in 1931, when Francis Chichester saw that thing, it was undoubtedly clear to the UFO nauts. I don't know how else to describe them, the aliens. I think they knew perfectly well that a biplane, this thing he was flying, was some kind of a biplane, um, and and I think they knew They knew that this thing posed no threat whatsoever. So I think what they were doing was just. I think what they were actually doing, and in his book he describes a lot more detail. When the second time it disappeared, it then popped up again about a mile away off to one side. I think what the craft was doing was moving in the back, moving away to get out of his way, and it was taking advantage, as we'll get to in a bit, the extra dimensions, and it was just moving because it knew that this craft, the biplane that they were observing, was very fragile, so they didn't want it to come near their craft. Because they were concerned about the pilot, So I think that's what they were doing. So I don't. I think. Let me add one more thing. I think it absolutely can be used for cloaking or stealth, but I think its primary purpose is going into these extra dimensions, and I will be getting to that shortly. So now another strange characteristic of these objects is a puzzling strong attractive gravity field near the object. Now that's, people talk about anti-gravity, but this would seem to be the exact opposite, and we're going to get to that too. Another thing is consistent shapes. They are typically spheres, discs, cylinders, and And when they do see a delta shape like we saw in Belgium back in the 1990s, um, there's usually three bright circles in each corner, and bright circular lights in each corner. So that circular aspect of these craft is um, something that is very consistent, and it goes all the way back to the 1930s. The one that Francis Chichester saw, he described as a disk. And then one more important thing.
So let me ask a question,
Yes,
because
yes, yes.
Mark talked about it. I think what you're describing when you say like a circular form, even within a triangle,
Yep.
is that for the purpose of like a particle accelerator, or is there something else?
That's what I'm going to get to. That's actually at the very end of the
Okay,
slideshow, but that's okay.
got it
Um,
ahead. Sorry.
and no problem. But anyway, another thing is Ted Phillips did a study, and he worked at CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, uh, with Dr. J. Allen Hynek up in Chicago, and they looked at multiple landing sites, including the Socorro, New Mexico site where Lonnie, what was his name?
Zamora.
Zamora, Lonnie Zamora. Um, they actually measured the indentations in the soil and the compressibility of the soil, and they were able to determine that that craft weighed many, many, many tons, and so that is very important. They found that these craft averaged between 10 to 30 tons. That is a lot of weight, and as Rob would definitely agree, being a structural engineer, and these things, and yet these craft can accelerate at blinding speed, and uh, and so we'll move on now to the next slide. Here's another example. These are more examples. TWA flight over Lake Michigan, 1981. Captain Phil Schultz and his first officer observed a round UFO with 6 black portholes. Perfectly clear weather. The UFO approached from 40,000 feet above the L-1011. Do you guys remember the Lockheed L-1011? And it flew directly in front of their L-1011 at over 1,000 miles an hour, and it departed with a 20 G turn. About the best that our human pilots can do with a G suit is about 10 Gs, so this is pretty uh, amazing. And here's a picture from the cockpit. You can see the craft coming in like this. And by the way, it had a black spot circle at the very bottom. That's been noticed before. I believe that's where they can look out. And I believe it's kind of like, smoke glass or something like that. And and then it took off like that. And and so what Captain Schultz said is extremely interesting. He said he had extensive experience as a U.S. Navy fighter pilot, and prior to this observation, he rejected the reality of UFOs. But after the sighting, he told Dr. Richard Haynes, quote, "There is no doubt in my mind it was an extraterrestrial craft." And then you guys probably know about U.S. Navy Commander David Fravor. He observed oops, I went too fast there. A Tic Tac UFO from his F-14 Tomcat. I see a picture of it. Oh no, it looks like an air. Dale, it looked like an aircraft carrier behind your picture there. And
It's a UFO.
yeah, that was a
If you
UFO.
look behind me, you see the same picture.
I thought for a second you put that up as
I need to get one of those though.
yeah, and so anyway, UFO performance versus Earth technology. Fighter jets can do about 13 G's acceleration. Um, that's about the max. Beyond that, they turn into jello. And a Boeing Hybex anti-missile, which has to shoot down other missiles, can accelerate between 300 and 400 Gs, but that's not a manned object. The U.S. Nimitz Tic Tac UFO, apparently the same one observed by Commander David Fravor, was measured on a radar at doing 5,000 Gs. It dropped let's see, it dropped, I think it was 5 miles elevation to the surface of the ocean. It went from a standing stop at 5 miles levitating, and it shot straight down to the surface of the ocean, stopped again, okay, and a physicist up at the University of Albany, New York State University, calculated that this thing underwent 5,000 Gs. Absolutely
Explain what that would do to the human body, so everybody knows what that kind of G's. Why G's are so important and why we can't survive it. What would it do to the human body?
Okay, I'll give you an exact example. If you weighed 150 pounds, you're a fighter jet pilot, and you can max out at about 10 Gs, 10 to 13, somewhere in that range. But at 10 Gs, your body would feel like it weighs 1,500 pounds. Okay, if you can imagine that. Imagine 150 multiplied by 5,000. Okay, you're talking, what is that, 50,000 or something like that pounds. You'd be squished. There would
like
be you'd be that's a 500,000. I'm sorry, over 500,000 pounds, half a million pounds, over half a million. So you'd be you better have your will all written up. And so that's and yet there appear to be creatures inside these craft. We got to and well, I'll explain how they survive these kind of G-forces. And so Air France Captain Duboc, that this is that sighting where he saw it disappear. And oh, by the way, that object they estimated was because they had a radar return on it and a visual. So they were able to determine that it was about 1,000 feet in diameter. That's gigantic. I think the biggest aircraft we have are maybe 250 feet wingspan or something like that. So this thing was solid and 1,000 feet. And of course, the plane, it's not solid in that entire 250 feet diameter. So now another sighting, very interesting one. I was up in 2014. A Canadian pilot saw a UFO near the ground, near Calgary, Canada, and he said as he watched it, he was above it. He noticed that it began to fade, and he could see the shape of the craft, but he could see right through it. And it was reports like this that got me. Over the years, for decades, I've been looking at them and thinking, this has to mean something, And now here's another sighting down in Blenheim, New Zealand, and this was back in 1959. I think it was in July, and it was I think Elaine Moreland, Mrs. Elaine Moreland. And she spotted this craft. And what's interesting about this thing is it came down from a great height, and it came down very, very fast. She spotted two green lights on the bottom, which you can see in the picture here. Um, and this thing it was like very early in the morning, about 6 a.m., pitch black down there. She was going out. She worked on a farm. I mean, her family were a farm family, and she was going out to um, milk the cows. And she got partway out into the paddy, the English term for a field, and and she said that she saw this eerie green light. She could see it kind of bathing the paddy, and so she looked up and she was horrified to see these two green lights hurtling down toward her. She ran into a small clump of woods, and she was maybe 100 feet away from this thing. And then it hovered about 30 feet above the ground, but she was on a slight elevation, maybe 20 or 25 feet. And so she could clearly see the side of this object. And one thing she spotted, which I think is extremely interesting, were these flames shooting out of little holes on the side. But on the top, they were shooting in one direction. On the bottom, they were shooting horizontally in the other direction. And and so she said this was really weird. she had never seen anything like it, as you can imagine. And then she said there were two entities in it, one behind the other, and one of the entities actually got up and seemed to be looking down at the ground or something, and then he sat down again. But they both had suits on, opaque helmets, and shiny silvery uniforms, which, by the way, has been reported before in close encounters. So that's very interesting. And remember this characteristic of the flames shooting horizontally in different directions around the side of this circular craft. And because that's going to be important, as we will see. So here's a quick summary of some other UFOs becoming transparent. Caracas, Venezuela, 74, observed by hundreds observed 4 stationary UFOs that were solid as can be, and then suddenly they just disappeared. And Phoenix, Arizona, this was a very famous sighting, the Phoenix Lights, 1997. Observers say they saw parts of the UFO appear semi-transparent. The Rendlesham Forest, that one, Colonel Charles Halt reports the UFO disintegrated on the ground. In fact, he actually, I saw him on a TV interview, he said it imploded. And then disappeared. And then, of course, the Tasman Sea, that was Sir Francis Chichester. And then U.S. Air Force F-86 pilot and others see hovering UFO blink out and disappear. And so the two big questions on UFO technology are, how did they get here? And how are these craft able to perform inertia-defying acrobatics in Earth's atmosphere? And that's what we're going to take a look at. And and Dale referred to this earlier. So how do they get here? Current thoughts on it are that they might be able to figure out how to go faster than light. Another thought is they go near light speed. And then another one is warping of space-time. Now, faster than light is forbidden by physics, and it does not seem to be a way around that. Einstein himself looked at that question and concluded that it was not possible. But it is possible in another sense, as we will see. Near light speed, that is actually plausible. But even at near light speed, getting to other star systems, the closest is Alpha Centauri, about over 4 light years from planet Earth. It would still take hundreds of years, centuries, and so wouldn't be practical. Thousands of years, actually. And then another thought is warping of space-time. And a Mexican physicist by the name of I think his name was Miguel Alcubierre. I don't know if you guys have heard of him, but he came up with an idea some time ago, some years ago, that caused a great deal of excitement. And the craft, that the physics that he was designing, he had figured out all the physics of it, and it appeared to work. If you could build a craft that could crank out enough energy that it could warp space-time in front of the craft and expand it behind the craft, you could then move across the universe much faster than or the speed of light, but you would have to warp space-time in front of you. Okay. Unfortunately, all 3 of these methods, the big problem is gigantic energy is needed, obviously for warping of space. If you think about it, so like I'm here in my house, I have a pencil. The entire planet Earth beneath me is pulling on this pencil. And now, admittedly, I don't do weightlifting, but the entire planet Earth is pulling on that pencil. Yet if I let go of it, I can catch it in my hand. And I'm not all that strong. And yet I can defy the entire planet Earth. The entire planet Earth is warping space-time all around us, and yet it's not that much warping. You can see. For this thing here, number 3, the warping would have to be vastly greater than that. So anyway, none of these, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the direction of modern physics to see if we can come up with an idea that could explain how UFOs work. And the two pillars of modern physics are general relativity and quantum mechanics. General relativity deals with the world of the very large. Quantum mechanics deals with the subatomic world, the world of the very small. And we'll just review these real quick. The 100th anniversary of general relativity was 2015. When I first did this slide back in the mid 2000s, I when I hit 2015, I made this slide, but it's so neat looking, I kept it in, and because I was doing talks around the country, and about gravity being a key to understanding the UFO phenomenon, and anyway, these are the Einstein field equations, and and as you can see, they are pretty hideous looking, and uh, and you can see the equal sign right there, and on the left-hand side is what they call the Riemann curvature tensor. It's a type of math that allows looking at things in a multidimensional viewpoint, because general relativity is based on 4 dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time, and that's called, we call it space time, and and then there's the cosmological constant that was actually added later. It's actually not necessary. You can solve the equation with just these 2 items here, which is known as the Ricci tensor. And then on the other side is the equal sign is the stress energy tensor, and these equations are extremely difficult to solve. So difficult that Einstein himself was not the first person to come up with an exact solution to the equations. Isn't that amazing? You know, and so anyway, this will give you an idea of how messy these equations are. Um, so this equation at the top of the page here is identical to the one on the previous page, except I colored in the first term um, in red. Then I expanded that term. That's the Riemann-Ricci tensor, and you can see all the gobbledygook that's inside of that. And these things, the gamma, the Greek letter gamma, and um, these are what they call connection coefficients, and Rob would know all this, but these are partial derivatives, and oh my God, solving this stuff is horrifying. And then the Christoffel connection, that's what these. So then I took one of those, it's called the Christoffel connection coefficient, and I expanded that. Now, I only did this term, that term, and that term, but you have to do this for all of these terms, including this guy. And then each of those blows out into some horrible thing like that. And then each of those blows out into something horrible. To give you an idea, guys, to figure the gravity between my thumb and forefinger can take like 120 equations.
Hmm.
So you can get an idea. This is a nightmare. And so this is so anyway. So you've got to be kidding. And
AI is going to have a big impact on some of this, don't you think?
I say that again.
Don't you think AI is going to have a big impact on some of this?
Yes, that's a good point, Dale. Very good point. Getting exact solutions to the field equations, um, like the 3-body problem, like if you have 3 planets and you're trying to figure out their trajectory and stuff, it's such a difficult problem that they're still arguing about it today.
Right.
But AI, you're right, Dale, that could be significant in solving some of these problems. Um, so the first exact solution to the Einstein field equation was incredibly in 1916. The field equations came out in the fall of 1915, but incredibly, a soldier in the German army by the name of Lieutenant Karl Schwarzschild, and this part just leaves me amazed. Um, this guy was an officer of the artillery. This is World War One, and he was on the Eastern Front. Now, artillery, as you can imagine, is pretty noisy, right? and how this guy, he got a copy of the field equations in early 1916, and he worked on them in his spare time, and I can't imagine him having much spare time. And but anyway, everyone will know the what he came up with. You guys will know instantly with his solution to his exact solution to the field equations, a black hole. And it's called the Schwarzschild black hole, and that's the solution to it right there. And it's much more complicated than that, but that's kind of the summarized version of it. And and um, and anyway, any object with a radius, this right there, the radius less than the Schwarzschild radius, will become a black hole. And photons and other particles, and this is important, pay attention to this, photons and other particles going at the speed of light cannot escape a black hole. So keep that in mind. Particles going at the speed of light cannot escape a black hole, because that will become important as we see. Another interesting characteristic of black holes is a very strong magnetic field, and that too is going to be significant, as we'll see. At this time, so okay, that takes care of general relativity. Now we're going to quickly review quantum mechanics, and this is very important to the theory, so you'll see. At this tiny scale, energy can only change in integer multiples of the Planck constant. But at the beginning of the 20th century, around 1900, um, scientists were puzzled by the discrete spectral lines of atomic spectra. So when they heated up a substance and they look at it through the light emitted through a prism, it would cast on a screen these discrete lines. But it was thought right up until 1900, it was thought that energy was continuous like a wave, definitely not discrete. But then in, I think it was 1900, Max Planck, a German scientist in Berlin, who was a contemporary of Albert Einstein, he, in experiments, realized that he came up with a formula called the Planck formula. And this indicates that energy comes in bits, and that H is Planck's constant. And so depending on the frequency, at each frequency, he discovered that energy will come in tiny little bits. It's discrete. It's not continuous, which is amazing. And then along came an Austrian physicist by the name of Erwin Schrödinger. And in my book, by the way, I do a derivation of his equation. If anybody wants to take a look at it, I make it easy for people to understand it. I have the calculus in the back, the basic calculus you need, how to derive it. If anybody wants to look at it, anybody can do it. And I can show them whatever calculus they need. It's in the book. But he described subatomic particles' behavior in terms of waves. However, he could only do that by incorporating h bar, which is actually Planck's constant, in his equations. So even though scientists were delighted when Schrödinger came out with his equation, because remember, prior to 1900, Maxwell's equations and things before that, everything was thought about in terms of waves. And so this did make it easier for physicists to play around with quantum mechanics. Okay, so more formulas. Give me another drink. And so when I do live things, I get a big laugh out of the audience, And so that's the end of the messy math. And now we're just going to look at concepts here. It's believed that our universe consists of from what we know so far, it consists of matter and force particles acting on the stage of space-time, four-dimensional space-time, three space and one time, x, y, and z plus time, and so we live on this four-dimensional space-time. And so force particles like photons and gluons and matter particles, we're all familiar with electrons, and maybe most people may not be aware of quarks. Photons, I think most people are aware of photons. They carry the electromagnetic force. And gluons carry the strong nuclear force, but we'll go into that in a second. A basic atom, this happens to be an isotope of hydrogen. The basic hydrogen atom is just a proton and an electron, but I prefer just to show the neutron as an example, because you can have, these are the three fundamental constituents of atoms. So you can have a proton, the positively charged, the negatively charged electron, and then a neutron. And deuterium is is, as I mentioned, an isotope of hydrogen. So that's just the basic atom. And then a proton itself is made up of smaller particles called quarks, and we won't go into that too deep, but it's made up of 3 quarks. These happen to be up and down quarks. And matter particles are named fermions after the Italian physicist Enrico Fermi, who did a lot of work classifying and studying from particle accelerator experiments. And he was able to classify all of them into a single small chart here. This is it. This is the ball game. All the matter particles are right here. So there's quarks that make up all the known atoms that we are that make up protons and neutrons, and so the first family here, there are 3 families, first, second, and third, but the first one is the most important, and this first one, up and down quarks are 99% of matter is made up of that, and leptons are include electrons and neutrinos, electron neutrino, and electrons are fundamental to atoms, as I showed. And the other 2 families of particles are heavier versions of the first family here, and they are still a bit of a mystery, but we're going to talk about that in a second further down as we get into it. And now that's matter particles. The other major constituent of our universe is force particles, which are called bosons. There was an Indian from like Hindu India, physicist by the name of Satendra Bose, B-O-S-E. You may have seen Bose Electronics and stuff. He did a lot of work classifying these things, these force particles, and there are only 4 fundamental particles, 4 fundamental forces. The strong nuclear force, which holds protons together in the nucleus. Sorry to go through all this detail, but we got it because it's important as we get further. The weak nuclear force, which is responsible for radioactive decay. Electromagnetism, which is carried by photons, and the weak force is carried by W plus W minus Z neutral particles, and the gluons there. And gravity is carried by a we've seen all of these other particles in particle accelerators, but the one particle we have not seen is the graviton. Now that's kind of interesting. And now the Higgs field, it's actually a field, has been discovered. I don't know if you guys remember back 2010 or something like that, they discovered the Higgs field, and that's involved in giving a mass to matter. And so they believe at the beginning of the universe, all the fundamental forces of nature were united in a single force called the superforce. And you guys are going to see what physics is doing. This is it. The holy grail of modern physics is to try to unite these 4 fundamental forces, and theoretically and experimentally if we can. So as far as we can get experimentally, but they want to do it theoretically. But they've had problems. And okay, that's just a cartoon. And so at the time of the Big Bang, everybody's heard of the Big Bang. That's when the forces were united, and they believe that 2 fundamental forces broke out less than seconds after the Big Bang. One was called the Good Force, the Grand Unified Theory, and the other was gravity. So gravity broke out very early. In fact, the 4 fundamental forces we see today are outlined in red here, as you can see on the slide. Then the Gut very quickly broke into the strong nuclear force and the electroweak force. And then the electroweak broke out into electromagnetism and the weak force. And that's where we get our 4 fundamental forces today. We have been working on uniting the fundamental forces of nature theoretically, and we have made progress. Um, it turns out that the electric and magnetic forces were once thought to be separate forces, but we now know via Maxwell's laws that those are actually they can be united in the electromagnetic laws that Maxwell figured out back in the 1850s, which is pretty amazing. Um, so the electromagnetism and the weak nuclear force, they have theorized that it formed the electroweak theory, and they finally found this electroweak force in particle accelerators. So we've actually solved part of the unification theory, and this gives us the physics community tremendous. It's exciting because it means we're moving in the right direction. The strong nuclear force and the electroweak, the Goot force that we saw in the other slide, the grand unified theory, they are now searching for that now. They have doing experiments all over the world at particle accelerators and stuff like that. And they do believe they're making progress on this. So the non-gravity forces, they've been making progress on. I got to get some water here, and but now the important thing, only gravity is not included in historical attempts of force unification. And the question is, why not? And it turns out that the problem is that gravity is exponentially weaker than the other three non-gravity forces in nature. So I set gravity arbitrarily to 1 for comparison. The weak electromagnetic and strong force, as you can see, are 10 to the 25th, 10 to the 36th, 10 to the 38th. And so they are all exponentially stronger. So, for example, the electromagnetic force is 1 followed by 36 zeros, not 100, which is 10 times, um, or 100, 100 times, and even not 1,000, which is, and so it's 1 followed by 36 zeros. I mean,
A number so large we don't have a name for it.
we don't have a name. Exactly, Dale. Perfect. I like that. I got to include that in future talks. And um, so this is called the hierarchy problem, also equivalent to the puzzle of the weak mass versus the Planck mass. And the known subatomic particles are at the weak mass. The Planck mass, however, is 16 orders of magnitude greater than the weak mass. Okay, so that's a gigantic difference. And the problem is, we can get unification if all the matter particles we know of were 16 orders of magnitude greater in mass than they currently are. But the problem is with that, but at that point, the beauty of that would be that we could unify all the forces of nature, we could bring them together. The only problem is, if we did do that, all the particles, if they were all at the Planck scale, the universe would disintegrate. And so I brought in an expert to ask him his opinion on this. And you mean my favorite donut shop will disappear? Homer Simpson. And usually when I talk to a big audience, they love that. And and not only Homer will your donut shop disappear, but everything else too. And so there we are. So here's the evolution of modern physics. So where we are today is the Standard Model, which is a synthesis of general relativity, quantum mechanics, and classical mechanics. Um, so and that's where we are today. But we've been working on grand unified theories. That's the Goot. Remember, we saw that. And we've been looking at other theories. And what has happened is the early theories were always based on 4 dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time. But by the time we started getting into the 80s, 70s, 80s, people began looking at the possibility that there might be more than 4 dimensions. And this is critical to, I think, UFO technology. So we thought that
So how do we prove that? That's one of the questions I've always wondered, because I know we're on the edge of it, but how do
Yep.
we prove it? How do we prove there's other dimensions?
Eh,
What's going to be the thing that's going to show the world that they're, definitively, no question, cut and dry?
And
What is it that's going to get us over the top?
Dale, that is the $100 million question, $100 billion question. And we're going to get to that. And I'm going to show you how I believe we can prove, well, not me, but that physicists are going to prove the extra dimensions exist. And I will show how I think UFOs may help us in that quest. So anyway, strings and so sometime at some point in the latter part of the 20th century, they were doing experiments in Geneva, Switzerland, um, at the particle accelerators that were located there. They've since been upgraded from back then, but they suddenly realized that many of the particles that they were seeing, the collisions, they were looking at the behavior of the particles after they collided, and they realized that they could only be explained if they were little wiggling strings. And that was the birth of string theory. But string theory would only work if you had extra dimensions which they could wiggle in and vibrate in. I said wiggle in. And so it's his new hobby, string theory. and So modern physics is at this stage, we're going to move ahead real fast, is pointing at an 11-dimensional universe, and six of the extra dimensions are believed to be curled up at every point in space-time, and we can kind of ignore that for now. That leaves 5 large dimensions. Historically, we lived in 4 dimensions. General relativity is based on 4 dimensions, 3 space, 1 time. So now we have an extra spatial dimension, and modern theory suggests that it looks like there are 2 4-dimensional membranes floating in a larger 5-dimensional space. And we're going to take a look at that. And here's a pictorial example of that. And here's the part that is so fascinating, because it goes into the UFO phenomenon. And this is what I figured out way back in the early late 90s and the early 2000s. I realized that this would definitely impact the UFO, that it could help us explain the UFO phenomenon. And so it turns out that all the standard model strings, so like in other words, quarks that make up protons, electrons, gluons, photons, the particles that we see with, and they're all open-ended strings. There we are, and the 2 ends of the string are, as you can see in the diagram, are stuck on a 4-dimensional membrane. And all of the particles that we know, except for 1, are stuck on that membrane. And then there appears to be another membrane out there. They're called D-branes, Dirichlet, named after a German mathematician who developed the math that's used in describing these membranes way back. So there's other strings out there, but these are not part of our standard model. And then the area in between is called the bulk. This is the 5-dimensional area between these 2 membranes. So each of the membranes, now in a drawing, I can only show the membranes as flat, but you have to think of them as 4-dimensional. And then in the middle here, of course, I cannot show 5 dimensions. We're 5 dimensions. We're only 3-dimensional creatures, and so you just have to imagine that. So this is really 5 dimensions, and the membranes are 4-dimensional. And so the only particle that physicists realized could go into the 5-dimensional area that they call the bulk, see in red there, the bulk, were the gravitons, which are closed loops. And because they are closed loops, they are not stuck on the four-dimensional standard model membrane that we live on, also known as the weak membrane, after the weak force and the weak mass. Along comes one of the theories that I found. There's a bunch of theories out there, many of them similar, but the one that I found that matched what I believe is probably the correct one, and we'll see why, and we can actually help them prove it, is one called warp geometry, because it solved the hierarchy problem. And the hierarchy problem is the problem of why gravity is so much weaker, exponentially weaker than the other fundamental forces of nature. And it poses the gigantic problem: we cannot unify the forces without gravity. So why is gravity exponentially weaker than the other forces? The warp geometry solves the weakness of gravity, as we saw in that.
So let me ask a quick question.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people are going to be wondering. You talk about unifying these four things together. Is that the benefit of power, energy? What's the purpose? What's the why would we want to do that? Why is that such an important goal? What do we get from it?
Oh, well, physics is always trying to understand the universe, and one of the early things they noticed, way back in Maxwell's time, was they thought that the electromagnetism and magnetism, I'm sorry, they thought the electric force and the magnetic force were two separate forces, but then Maxwell united them in his Maxwell's equations, and that suddenly got physicists very excited, because they said, wait a minute, what if the other forces of nature could be added to that too? And the only other force at that time that was known about, they didn't know about the nuclear forces, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force. The only other force known then was gravity. So there was a whole lot of ideas of uniting gravity with electromagnetism. And oddly enough, strangely enough, there were some people back then, some English physicists, who came up with the idea that back then, this is in the 1800s, the idea that maybe there were extra dimensions that were somehow that would be involved in unification. They were more than a century ahead of their time. And isn't that kind of amazing? And but anyway, when the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force were discovered, and then in particle accelerators, we recreated the weak nuclear force, and we united it into the electro-weak force, electromagnetism plus the weak force. You cannot imagine the excitement in the physics community. It became apparent that at the beginning of the universe, the forces were almost certainly united at the time of the Big Bang. And so we're trying to get back to that time of the Big Bang. We want to theoretically show that how the forces were united back at that time. So that's that. So Dale, that was a great question. The second, the one membrane we live on in their theory that I showed in the picture is the weak membrane. The other one is the gravity brane. And the gravity brane, however, is warped in such a way that almost all gravitons, and this is the key to the whole thing. And so here it is. So I'm showing this is the weak membrane, also known as the TeV, trillion electron volts. That's the energy level. And over here is the Planck brane, which is 10 to the 16 power great. It's in the giga electron volts. And so anyway, it's believed that the gravity brane is warped in such a way, it's causing most of the gravitons in the larger universe to be located close to this gravity brane, which, by the way, is not necessarily that far from the weak brane. It could be very, very, very close. And the second I saw this theory, I thought, wait a minute, what if UFOs were able to leave the weak membrane that we live on? If they could get to this area, if they could protect themselves from the staggering gravitational forces in there, I knew that we're going to go to the next thing. I knew that, and here's what I figured out way back 25 years ago. Strong gravity shrinks distance and dilates time. Okay, so that's well known if you near a black hole, distance shrinks and time slows down, dilates. And so it dawned on me that um, because of the shrinkage of distance in a strong gravity field, if the UFOs could penetrate into the five-dimensional bulk, they could go between the stars. Time dilation, don't worry about that. It's not significant. You'll, but Mother Nature provides a natural pathway to the stars. We do not need huge amounts of energy to warp space, which was a previous obstacle. If we could somehow get into the bulk and go deep enough in, we could go deep enough in to where distance shrinks enough that travel to other stars would be a piece of cake. Okay, and we're going to take a look at that. So here's how distance shrinks in the 5D bulk, and you can see how it shrinks.
Now,
And
let me ask a question now. Isn't it more difficult to do shorter distances than the longer distances? I'd heard somebody say that.
Nope. Actually, if we can get in there, we can move in there. Now, actually, you have a good point there. In another respect, because you're going to be in a sea of gravitons. These gravitons are going to have tremendous force on the craft, but we will get to that. I talk about that.
I can't remember who said it. Somebody had mentioned that it's easier for us to go, to another universe than it is to go to another planet in our own another galaxy than in our own galaxy. Somebody had said that. I can't remember who it was now.
Oh,
that's where I was getting that from for whatever reason, and it's kind of the same line that you're talking about.
Yeah, they might have been talking about wormholes. They might have been talking about wormholes. Yeah,
I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, but anyway, in particle accelerators, they're going to be looking for these evidence of the extra dimensions, and that will be the evidence will be when they see undetected, what they call Kaluza-Klein particles. These are particles that will only that will appear in our particle accelerators if extra dimensions exist. They're particles that can only be created if extra dimensions exist. And these are named after Theodor Kaluza, a German physicist, and Oscar Klein, a Swedish physicist, who came up with this theory way back in the 20s or 30s, and they came up with an idea that, so the idea of extra dimensions has been bounced around, but they gave up on it until more recently. But anyway, if these extra dimensions exist, we will be able to see missing energy in our particle accelerators. And that missing energy, and pay attention to this, will be KK particles returning to the bulk. And those Kaluza-Klein particles, they could be any kind of particle, KK quark, KK graviton, could be anything. Just like E.T. in Steven Spielberg's movie Extraterrestrial, KK particles, the number one thing they want to do after they're created in our particle accelerator in our in our four-dimensional universe, they want to go home, and just like ET, and so they're going to leave very quickly. They're going to head home, and I think that's what these UFOs are doing. I think they're surrounding their craft with KK particles. It doesn't necessarily have to be gravitons. It could be other type of KK particles, but I believe that's what they're doing. And it probably is KK gravitons, because KK gravitons, which we'll see in another slide, can be used, although other particles could do it too. But anyway, I believe that's what they are doing. They are pulling themselves off of our membrane and into the bulk. And Sir Francis Chichester, world famous pilot, he observed the UFO over the Tasman Sea. And this is a quote right out of his book, page 165. Here's the title: The Lonely Sea and Sky. And if you guys get that book, you can find it on page 165. This quote: "It came on, but instead of increasing in size, it diminished as it approached. That could be significant. When quite near, it suddenly became its own ghost. 1 second I could see through it, and the next it had vanished." And I think he was witnessing a UFO leaving our membrane, our four-dimensional membrane, and moving into the bulk. I think that's exactly what he saw. And now let me show you how incredible this is if we can get into this 5D bulk. Warp geometry says, the theory, distance shrinks in the bulk. The nearest star system to Alpha Centauri is 4.3 light years, which is 25 trillion miles. Okay? The gravity force in the bulk increases by 10 to the 16 orders of magnitude between the Teb brain and Planck brain. Assume that the UFO only goes part way into the bulk to the point where gravity is only 10 to the 12th, not 10 to the 16 orders of magnitude stronger than on the Teb brain. Then the distance to Alpha Centauri shrinks from 25 trillion miles to 25 miles. And guys, we could get into our car, and in half an hour we could be in Alpha Centauri. Assuming our spaceship was protected. And that's what got me so excited when I saw these theories coming out. But I knew they had a lot of. It would take a long time before the particle accelerators could find these extra dimensions. They even back then, partly because they didn't upgrade the accelerators till about the mid 2020s, about 2010. So we've been taking data from the LHC, and but anyway, and this is another cartoon I like. And Bart says he goes to Alpha Centauri in just 30 minutes. And if you can see Bart being sucked up into the UFO. And so the two big questions on UFO technology: how did they get here? The answer: Mother Nature provides a natural warp pathway. And that's critical because Mother Nature is providing the energy that is needed to go to the other stars. And that's the key to the whole thing. And now the second big question is, how are these craft able to perform inertia-defying acrobatics in Earth's atmosphere? And we'll take a quick look at that. So KK gravitons create micro black holes that absorb four-dimensional gravitons. Do you remember when I mentioned at the beginning that black holes absorb anything, even objects going at the speed of light?
Right.
So photons go at the speed of light. That's why they call them black holes, because the photons are absorbed. And but the same is true of gravitons. Gravitons get stuck around a black hole too. They actually go into orbit. So KK gravitons create micro black holes, and that's in the theory, in the warp geometry theory. Four-dimensional micro black holes decay into fermions, scalar bosons, and gauge bosons. We will see Hawking radiation. Four-dimensional gravitons are absorbed by the micro black hole, and so 5D particles then end up going to the bulk gravitons. Graviton exchange between the Earth and the UFO is reduced. Now, I need to emphasize this is not anti-gravity, has nothing to do with anti-gravity. Anti-gravity would require warping space-time instead of positively, negatively, which positively is like the surface of a sphere, negatively is like the surface of a saddle. It's just, physicists have looked at this and, concluded that it's really not possible. But you don't need to do it because you got this. And so this is not anti-gravity. Instead, gravity and the inertial force, this is critical, the inertial force is reduced to near zero. And So here's the micro black holes, and I'm sorry, here's the KK gravitons, and they produce the micro black holes, which allow. So the UFO does not have any graviton exchange between the Earth and the UFO. The gravitons, the four-dimensional gravitons, are absorbed by these micro black holes. So remember, these are. Isn't that a?
Do they control that through the particle accelerator? So I'm thinking about how do you
Yes.
go where you want to go and come back and
Yes.
how do you control it?
Yep, you're exactly right, Dale. You actually, Mark has seen my presentations a few times, and so you got ahead of me because that's actually the very ending, the grand,
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Should have had you on first, then Mark.
That's the grand finale, so absorption and emission of a micro black hole, that kind of just goes into details, so how UFOs overcome inertia. You guys have probably heard of the equivalence principle of general relativity. That's the foundation of general relativity. That was the key to to him developing his field equations. And that says that inertial mass is equal to gravitational mass, which is weight. And by the way, that doesn't theoretically that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But Einstein made the assumption, and I believe he's right. Every test they've ever done indicates that it's correct. By eliminating or reducing gravitational mass, UFOs eliminate or reduce. I think they're just reducing the inertial mass. So what that means is a 30-ton UFO floating above the Earth. As far as the Earth is concerned, a few gravitons get through, not many, because they don't totally wipe them out. The Earth is saying, "Oh, that object weighs maybe 12 ounces," and that's it. And but if it only weighs 12 ounces, it's going to be a bit unstable in our atmosphere, and we're going to get to that. And excuse me. The Large Hadron Collider in UFO configurations. This is what you had actually jumped ahead. The Large Hadron Collider. It's okay though, no problem. The Large Hadron Collider (LHC) is expected to produce KK gravitons and micro black holes. UFO configurations are typically disks, cylinders, or spheres. Even triangle UFOs have bright circles in the corner. So why do UFOs have the circular aspect to their shape? And this is usually the grand finale, because UFOs are particle accelerators, and that's it, and that's what it's all about. I thought you'd like this cartoon. Professor Landsberg was fast regretting becoming the first man to successfully create a mini black hole in the laboratory. and then that's just a picture of the collision of particles. And another great cartoon here, if I can get that out of the way. Fine, I'll say it. The Hadron Collider was a bad idea. Are you happy now, Bob? I thought that was cute. In other words, originally, many people were concerned that the Large Hadron Collider would literally swallow Switzerland and then the entire planet.
Destroy everything, yeah, like a black hole.
Yeah, exactly. So if all else fails, this is one of the detectors at the Large Hadron Collider. See the two scientists down here. These detectors are huge. If all else fails, it makes a great frothy latte. And here's the CERN, the Large Hadron Collider is located here, and you can see it's on. It actually goes into France a little bit. It's mostly in Switzerland. Now here's something interesting. There's some circumstantial evidence that supports this idea, that they are using warp geometry, and a UFO observed in Sonora, California. Okay, this is one of the circumstantial pieces of evidence. and a crisis in physics. These two. And the UFO sighting in Sonora, California, um, that was in 1976. They found tritium, which is another isotope of hydrogen, in angel's hair. Have you guys heard of angel's hair? Angel's hair? See, people
Yeah,
from my who has
Rob
I
has.
have.
Rob has. Yep.
Corso talked about that in his book a lot.
There.
Leftover from sightings.
Yep. And it was better known back in the 50s, 60s, mainly because I was paying attention to this stuff back then, that I picked up on it back then. But it was kind of this silky cobweb-like substance that they often saw shimmering coming down from underneath the UFO. So it turns out, so anyway, they found tritium, this isotope of hydrogen, was found in angel's hair. They got a sample in California. Tritium is rare in nature, but it is found in particle accelerators. And that's exactly what you'd expect. If these things, the circular disks, if these are particle accelerators, you'd expect some evidence that they are particle accelerators. One obvious piece is that they're round. A second piece is tritium. And so, and now the second thing is a crisis in physics. There's two major theories. The extra dimension theories to explain the hierarchy problem, and another theory called supersymmetry, which did not involve the extra dimensions. But the supersymmetry theory, if it was true, at the energy levels that the Large Hadron Collider achieved, it was expected to find certain particles that would be produced, and 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 so they have not found those particles, and so that's the failure of supersymmetry. And supersymmetry was the only other way that they could solve the hierarchy problem. So these warp geometry theories, many of them, are now more likely. And and so where do we go from here? Um, can we prove? I think yes. I mean, physicists can prove whether warp geometry is true. The Large Hadron Collider will eventually give evidence confirming or disproving M theory. Uh, um, it's sometimes referred to as M theory, mother of all theories, or membrane theory. So they have a bunch of different names. And more UFO. Now here's us, where we get involved, UFO researchers. More UFO data needs to be acquired. In particular, a full spectrum analysis of brightly lit UFOs would provide critical data on how they function. I've talked to Mark D'Antonio. There was a guy out here. Oh gosh, what was his name? Um, you guys may know his name. I can't remember his name. um, he was a Hollywood special effects guy. Does that ring a bell with anybody? But he was interested in the UFO phenomenon. Um,
There's
but
a
what did I hear a name?
There's a question. I was going to say, I just
Oh,
want you to look at it. My
and
wife put a question up there about what happens to the
yeah.
oxygen when you go to, is it all self-contained inside the craft?
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that's how you'd get oxygen from one dimension to another.
Yep, and that's a good question, because we have to figure out how the craft survives. It has to, the key to the survival of the craft in the bulk, in the five-dimensional bulk, it has to produce enough micro black holes to absorb all these extra gravitons that are in the this gigantic concentration of gravitons, and it has to constantly absorb them to be protected. Um, and if it doesn't, it's going to collapse, like those undersea explorer, like the um, undersea explorer things, like the Alvin, the Woods Hole used, to look at the Titanic, and but um, so they're going to have to continue to produce. So that question is a very good one. The environment inside the craft, this circular craft, they're going to continually have to produce micro black holes, which will absorb the excess gravitons in the five-dimensional bulk. Otherwise, they're toast. And so they have to do that. But I'm sure they've perfected that technology over the many years.
I want
and
to get onto that in a minute. Whenever you get done with this, I want
yeah,
to go into what
yeah.
the difference between us and them.
Oh, you got it. May not be that great. And we are looking for the unique spectrum. So we as UFO researchers, Dale, Rob, you and Dale, um, if and Mark D'Antonio, I've talked to Mark about this. What the heck is that guy's name? Oh, it's going to come to me. Can you look up can you look up, guys, special effects guy for 2001, A Space Odyssey? Do you guys remember that movie?
I remember the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What work are you talking about that he did specifically?
Yeah. Look for the name of the special effects guy who worked on the 2001 A Space Odyssey.
It was a physicist, wasn't it?
No, he was actually a camera guy.
Space Odyssey 2001.
He was a specialist in a photography specialist, but with videos and that kind of stuff. What the heck was his name? Oh gosh, he died unfortunately a few years ago.
This gave me a long list. It's not giving me a ready answer to the question. Kurek's the one who made it.
What's his name? Oh gosh, if I could. Oh, it's so. I should put it in my slides, then I'd never forget it. And what's his name? I bet other people watching, if they might write a message to you.
What was his theory that he contributed to make him notable?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Oh no, he developed. This guy was interested in the UFO phenomenon as well. You know what? Let me just go through this real quick. This guy, whose name I can't remember, he outfitted a Humvee with all this specialized equipment that he could use to track UFOs, and he actually lives in lived. He died in Western Massachusetts, but he worked in Hollywood for many years, and he was very famous out there. But anyway, um, uh, I unfortunately, by the time I talked to Mark D'Antonio about Mark D'Antonio worked with this guy. That's where my interest came in, why I was talking to Mark, because I wanted to see if his friend, if I could get him to put a little extra equipment in his apparatus that would detect the Hawking radiation that is emitted by micro black holes that decay. They decay very quickly. So anyway, that's what I was talking to Mark D'Antonio about. But unfortunately, we by the time we really started to get into it, this guy had passed away, and I don't know if anybody else has picked up on what he's done. But we need is a billionaire to help us out on this. And if you guys know any billionaires, and
Elon Musk, just call him up. Elon Musk.
If you guys know him personally, please call him. And so Hawking radiation is a byproduct of micro black hole decay, and it terminates in a burst of gamma rays. Oh, there was another guy, Hall. He's a much older, way back in the 60s, 70s. I can't even remember his name. His last name I think was Hall, but he was an engineer, and he saw a UFO himself, and that got him absolutely fascinated with UFOs. He saw it down in Maryland, and he worked for NASA. So this guy was in the right business, and he oh wait, so now I've lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what it was. He went out and he had Geiger counters and some other equipment, and he had a team of guys. The UFOs back in those days seemed to be coming down. There were more close encounters where not where there were beings or anything like that, but where the UFO was seen on the ground. And so one of his team members recorded data close to a UFO, and one of the things that he saw, he said there was gamma rays coming out of the UFO. And interestingly enough, Hawking radiation, micro black hole decay, ends in a burst of gamma rays, which would be continuous because they'd be constantly creating micro black holes. Isn't that amazing? And they found this way back then. But we need better definitive data. We need way better data than this one piece of data. But it looks like we're heading in the right direction. Detection of Hawking radiation would virtually confirm UFOs are using M-theory warp geometry, KK gravitons, and micro black holes. We cannot predict the appearance of UFOs, but they are often seen multiple times in the same geographic area, such as the Phoenix Lights, Hudson Valley sightings, or Belgian triangles. And these are, this is one of the Belgian triangles. And guys, notice the circular lights, and notice how bright they are. That's very important. The brightness, I think, is because of the radiation that they're emitting, including gamma rays and Hawking radiation. And this was seen off the coast of Massachusetts at the Coast Guard station. And notice again how bright the objects are. And here's a photograph taken in Namur, Belgium. And notice how it's bright only on the bottom. And so that could be that at times they don't surround the thing with micro black holes. They keep the top clear. Can you guess why they keep the top clear? Because they're looking out.
Direction.
Yeah, so they may have ways to navigate anyway, but it would be really nice just to observe the local terrain, And
that guy you were looking for, was his name Douglas Trumbull?
That's him. Thank you, Dale.
My wife. That was my wife.
Thank you, wife, for me.
Kelly,
oh my
Kelly.
God. Yeah. Douglas Trumbull, Trumbull. He was. If your wife checks it out, he was well known in Hollywood. He worked on a whole bunch of those films. I think he even did. What was the other one? Let's see, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I think he worked on that. I mean, he was big in Hollywood. He worked on the special effects on those big movies, and so he and if you guys could find it, he has there's a short video out there. What is it? What's the name of it? Gosh, I should keep this stuff handy with me. It's something with UFO. UFO photog. These words, UFO FOTOG. A video on YouTube. If you could bring that up, that would be the most amazing thing. And I'm just going to show a couple other pictures. This is an interesting one. This looks like some kind of probe. It's again circular in shape, and it was following. Do you guys know what kind of aircraft this was? It was jet powered, but it was way back in the 50s. I should know, but I can't remember.
And you know that one, Rob? Nope, me neither.
Not right off.
I remember. Oh, well, no big deal. 1957. This is a picture taken. I say that again.
It was listed. The craft, what it was listed underneath the bottom of it.
Oh, right. Yep. It was in France.
That one's similar.
Unfortunately,
to
it shows two different dates. I don't know why, but it was a gun camera thing. And see that protuberance on the top? You had mentioned the McMinnville
is one that was on. I think I've seen that before. They're almost identical.
See what I mean? Isn't that amazing? And it was in the 1950s, I think.
Yeah.
And here's a cutaway of the Large Hadron Collider, and here's inside the Large Hadron Collider. And this shows the Atlas detector which is one of this 4 detectors in the LHC. This is one of them. Can you see the technician engineer
Yeah.
down here at the bottom? That gives you some idea of how big this mother is here. And I better be careful with my language. And but they so I just wanted people to see the scale of the science that's now going on. And but I also want to point out, it's interesting. They had a problem. The entire they had to shut down the Large Hadron Collider some years ago because um, they had some technical problems with it, and the CERN, the Center for European Nuclear Research, they have it's like a city, and they have thousands and thousands of people involved. They have their own police force, they have their own shopping, they have their own housing. I mean, it's like a city, and so they were afraid that sabotage had occurred, so they had to investigate what had gone wrong, and they spent a lot of time, and they finally discovered the problem, and it did look like sabotage. They actually found in some of the sensitive electronics, they found bubble gum forced into the sensitive electronics in a couple of different places in one location. But they finally found the culprits, and they're here on the next page.
Kids. Oh my goodness.
I get a big kick during it when I do this. But they think the ringleader was this little guy in the middle with 2 thumbs up. A bunch of kids. They were visiting the Large Hadron Collider. That was just a joke. So the question is, you asked before, Dale, where do we go from here?
Right.
Are we there yet? I thought you'd like that. And so, but anyway, so are any other questions, or you guys have questions? Or
One thing I was going to say, and I thought, even in the wording of your book, you meant modern physics. You also had the word crisis in physics, and it's evolving. And I just wonder, because some of these civilizations could be a million years more advanced than we don't know, but it could be. Let's just put that possibility out there. And I mean, we're not even cavemen in our understanding. The stuff that we're looking at that was very complicated that you showed us. I mean, that may be like grammar for those guys, the ABCs and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's just interesting to see, what we're going to discover as the years go on. I mean, give us 10,000 years, give us 100,000 years. And it's going to be amazing what physics looks like in maybe even 100 years from now. How different, because you used the word modern, which means there was something prior to it that couldn't conceive of what we have right now, right?
Okay, I agree, Dale. I got to tell you this, because I think we may be observing the answer to that idea of how long it's going to take us before we get to this point, and we may already know. I'll show you why. And it may not be as far ahead. It may not be that distant in the future. The reason I say that is because UFO sightings way back in, they had UFO sightings way back in Roman times. There are reports of flaming shields following Roman galleys rowing across the Mediterranean. And what's interesting about that is a shield is circular. They had the typical flying saucer shape and the glow flaming back then, and that's how they described it. Um, so, um, and then Hannibal was invading India or something like that. The guys did a lot of that stuff back then, and he was going across one of the rivers, a shallow river, with his war elephants, and this is thousands of years ago, but it was recorded. He said that the elephants got partway across the river, and they were in the forefront with warriors on the top in baskets. These guys, they said that they observed this disc-shaped object and again they described it as a shield on the other side of the river, but high up in the air. And it suddenly shot down real fast toward the war elephants, which of course immediately caused the war elephants to panic, and they all fled back to the nearby shore. So then, after a while, maybe 15, 20 minutes, the object by this time had gone back up. They decided to try again. They thought it was a sign from the gods, but so they got again partway across, and the object a second time came down and scared the daylights out of them. But this time it went back up, and then it flew away. So they were finally able to get across the river. But they did describe that incident, and when I tell audiences about this, when I do talks around the country, I say it's probably cosmic teenagers having a little fun.
Awesome.
And
Celestial cow tipping.
exactly in Pennsylvania. Well, you're from Missouri, Rob. When our daughter went to Penn State, she said out there the people said for fun out there. It's in a rural area. For fun, they did cow tipping. I'd never heard of it. I'm from New Jersey, so anyway, yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I think they were just having a little fun, and but here's the interesting thing: UFO sightings historically were pretty far and few between. They occurred only now and then, and they did occur, and they noticed them in I think there was a battle around a Swiss castle, and a UFO came down, and everybody was shocked, and it was observing the battle, but it was a typical disc-shaped UFO, and here and there the stories come through. In the 1800s, there were a few stories too, but then when we set off nuclear weapons in World War II in the 1940s, the number, as you guys well know, the number of UFOs reports absolutely exploded. I mean, they were all over the place, and I think that is extremely significant. I think that the time between understanding nuclear technology, which requires an understanding of general relativity and quantum mechanics, you got to have them both. I think when a civilization, any civilization, there's got to be billions, probably trillions of civilizations out there. I think there's probably kind of a federation of advanced civilizations out there, and I think that federation has rules. There's no interference with a developing civilization because they don't want to, do something that might create problems, But at the same time, if we can figure out the technology to get to other star systems, then we actually have nuclear weapons. We could be a problem for them, even with our, we could suddenly pop out of nowhere, drop a bomb on one of their cities, and there wouldn't be much they could do. So I think this federation becomes extremely interested in any civilization that has reached the point where they set off nuclear weapons, because they know at that point they may only be decades or a century away from understanding how to get into the bulk. That's
either that or preventing us from annihilating ourselves, because there's a lot of civilizations that wouldn't survive the threshold of discovering nuclear detonation, fission. So the preservation of the species in an oasis in a celestial desert, they could keep us from destroying the planet that way. If that's what they also had in mind, in part.
I think these extraterrestrial civilizations are, I think they're benevolent. I don't think they mean any harm to us. And I think, in fact, what you just said, Rob, you may know about the incidents out at in North Dakota, where Robert Salaz, who I met in person. I did a talk down at Del Rio, a UFO conference down there, and I was in the car with him for about 8 hours, 4 hours down, 4 hours back from San Antonio or someplace like that, and I talked with him a long time, and they shut down 2 flights of missiles, I think 32 or 16 or something like that.
Yeah.
And each of them had MIRV capability, multiple reentry. And so these were hundreds of nuclear bombs. And these things, these UFOs, had figured out, despite the fact that they have all kinds of protection, including their supposedly electromagnetic protection, these darn UFOs had figured out how to penetrate that and shut everything down. and and why would they do that? If for there, like you said, they may very well have been saying, "Hey, guys, we have the power to shut everything down." And a similar event occurred in the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union. I can't remember the town. It was some nuclear thing, base or something, but they had a UFO appeared over this Soviet base, and they had a big antenna there, and I think it was they started
The woodpecker array.
Was that it? Is that
Yes,
it?
yes, the woodpecker is a giant
And-
giant electrical structure. They've
Yeah,
actually turned them off and switched them on in both countries at one point or another.
And as I remember this story, Rob, they actually melted this gigantic antenna. The UFO just sent obviously some kind of laser beam at it, and the whole darn thing just melted. And the Russians, after that, they decided never again to shoot at the UFOs. And so I think they have been, like you said, sending us a message that, hey guys, we don't want you to hurt each other, and we have the power to prevent that. And plus, we do not want you bringing your stuff to our planet. So I think they are watching us very carefully. I think they have means and ways of determining when we're finally able to get into the bulk and then become a true threat to them. And I think at that point, they're going to come down with an offer we can't refuse. Guys, either join the Federation and give up all nuclear weapons, or we'll take those nuclear weapons away from you. And I think at that point there'll be a carrot and stick. They'll probably say, look, there'll be a lot of benefits belonging to the Federation, but there are requirements for belonging to. And so I think that's what's going on. And so I think we're a lot closer to getting into the 5-dimensional bulk than people realize. And by the way, we guys can help. If we could, if Dale, if your wife could look up UFO TOG, did she try it?
I don't know. I don't know if she's still there.
Oh, okay. And but anyway, if you guys can find it tonight, anytime tonight, even on your own too, you look up UFO TOG, UFO. Oh, that's what it is. UFO TOG. It's 6 letters. UFO TOG, meaning photography, and but it does video and stuff too. But he converted a Humvee, made it so that the roof opened up. It's a little 5-minute video. Boy, Dale, if you could find it, that's what we need. We need that. We need a fleet of those things. We need Elon Musk to help us outfit these things, buy them. And boy, if you could find that video, it's only about 3 or 4 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, but it's really, really good. Are you looking for it?
No.
No.
We're over 2 hours. I don't think.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We're
I'm
2
sorry,
hours
guys.
and 4 minutes already. But people can look at that on their own and look it up and see it. Yeah. I don't know how long it would take to do it and find it. And then for me to pull it up, I mean, like I said, I can't just do a YouTube video. I have to convert it and everything else. Like I did for your other one. So it would take forever.
And So I agree. I think I didn't realize it's been 2 hours, and I sorry guys, I didn't mean to.
Oh, it's
I
okay.
Yeah,
what
we had a very interesting discussion, and I love it. One thing I do have to say though is I'm with you. I tend to believe most of the stuff I'm dealing with is benign, but I also, to be fair to other people out there that have had negative experiences, some of them horrifying experiences, and I'm not saying I understand completely what they are, but I don't want to ignore them either, because they're going to hear this and they're going to, there seems to be two sides to this, that there's a side that it's all good, and there's a side that it's all bad, and I think there's probably a little bit of both, but I think I probably agree with you as well that there seems to be some kind of federation that sets the rules, and they can only go so far, because they're clearly interacting with people, but they're not interacting directly with our government. They're not landing on the White House.
exactly.
But there's definitely interaction
Thinking
going on. Yeah.
competing agendas that were like with the nukes, for instance. I think the aspect of the phenomena that's native to the planet, there's a self-preservation of the planet that would come into play. And if there's some kind of a impactor that we see comes in cycles, we can't contain our nuclear stockpiles and spent fuel rods and all that such. If we get hit with even a hemispherical impactor or something of that nature, we're not able to contain all that nuclear waste. Look what happened with Fukushima that irradiated the Pacific.
Yes.
So how much more damaging would it be with multiple facilities getting knocked offline? It would sterilize the planet. But there's also the speculation of advanced scouting. Say we rang a dinner bell with the detonation in Trinity, that those would be coming here investigating. But I also agree with the Galactic Federation aspect of it, that there seem to be rules of engagement in place to not interfere in the affairs of man. But then there's that clause that, especially if they live here, it's their planet too, to not interfere unless they're going to destroy the rest of the planet with them, us. And in which case, I would hope that they would intervene to keep that from happening.
And Rob, I totally agree with what you're saying there. I also think that part of that regulation they require for to belong to the Federation, which will be an offer we can't refuse. But it won't be a bad offer. It'll actually be quite a good one. I think part of their what they will require will be continual monitoring of our planet after we are part of the Federation, to make sure there's no further development of nuclear weapons. And that's
I've had that discussion with Steve Bassett as well. Just the idea that,
look at slide 9, they're able to take over executive interface. I'm sure that they would be able to monitor the collective consciousness as well as our internet, and would know instantaneously when anyone's developing nuclear weapons or advancing them again, either one.
Yep, and that's right, and it's of great interest that I noticed. There's another guy whose name I can't remember. He wrote a book on
Robert
UFOs.
Hastings.
Say that again.
Robert Hastings.
That's him. Have you had him on your show?
No, I've read the book.
Robert Hastings. He does UFOs and their interest in our nuclear facilities and stuff. Well, I have his book too, and I remember reading stories. I read it many years ago, but I remember reading stories about I think it was the Indian Head nuclear facility in New York State on the Long Island Sound or someplace like that. But a UFO came over, and it moved directly. There were 3 nuclear generators in the facility, but only one was working. And Robert Hastings pointed out that the UFO identified that one immediately. It moved directly over the one that was operating.
Yeah.
And I find that amazing. So they may be picking up neutrinos or something like that are coming out of the nuclear generators. And they have an ability to detect these kind of. We have a terrible time trying to detect neutrinos. It's very difficult to do, but they're more sophisticated, and they probably have figured it out. And And then other ones like, oh gosh, they've been, let's see, and I think, I can't think of, oh, they've shut down more than one nuclear missile site. They've shut
Yeah.
down others. Yeah. And I'm losing my voice here. And but yeah, this is so Douglas Trumbull. I hope you guys can look up UFO Tog later. Watch that video. That's what we need. That the equipment that he develops, that conversion of a Humvee into a platform for detecting UFOs. You got to see the video. It's fabulous. In fact, Dale, if I find it, I will send it to you. I'll find the link and send it to you.
I
And
watched
They
Reality
also,
Check. They also had some kind of technology over in Skinwalker Ranch and Uinta Basin over there, where they're actually testing for them to be out there. But you're talking about a vehicle that will actually have all of it on it,
yes,
correct?
yep, and yeah. Oh, and but I'm interested in what they're doing out there too. It could be added to our other devices, and so uh, I'm actually, I probably better get going myself
Yeah,
because
it's after
I may,
2:11.
yeah,
another
Let me go ahead and get
one of the
this.
signatures to watch for on the nuclear
okay.
capabilities is anti-neutrinos because that's extremely rare.
Oh,
There's several
yep,
things that can produce neutrinos, but to
and
track them specifically, the anti-neutrinos are ultra rare. So finding a source of that would be basically a unicorn. So there may be an interest
uh-huh,
in
yeah,
the being around. That would be a way to detect them. But if there's also any kind of organic component or inorganic or technological entity that is able to utilize the anti-neutrinos as a power source or something,
and yep,
that would
and
be one explanation possibly for why they would be tracking and being in such close proximity to all of our nuclear assets, whether it's civilian
uh-huh,
stockpiles or
yep.
military applications. So
And exactly. And even after nuclear activity in a given location, after the atomic bombs at Bikini, UFOs were sighted near that site. Now they might have a way of navigating in the five-dimensional bulk, which includes us, because we're on one end of that.
yeah,
Um, they may have a way of, like you had already said, detecting these anti-neutrinos that may be produced by the nuclear weapons, and they then pinpoint it. They have their
yeah,
own navigation system, and then they just go directly to that site and
yeah,
say,
because that would be in highly
"Mm,
concentrated focal points where they could hone in
yeah,
specifically on the anti-neutrinos and take it right
and
back to the source.
yeah, wouldn't that be incredible?"
Yeah,
And but I bet they have it. I bet they have that
yeah.
technology. Yeah, and so so guys, I'm afraid I might be keeping her
Oh, that's
bedroom is
fine.
directly
Uh-oh.
above us, and
Okay.
where I am here, and I'm afraid I might be keeping her up. So I better.
Well,
I'll hear
I
about
heard
it.
that.
I'll
well,
hear about it in the morning.
right.
And
Well, we
so
better close it out then. It sounds like it's been a couple hours, which isn't bad. Not a big
yeah,
deal. The only thing is I could not do that without taking it and converting it to MP4. And so it's not like I could just get a video and just throw it up here,
yeah,
and
and
so there's no way of doing it. My wife did tell me though that she sent it to my messenger. So we have it so we can check it out later.
okay,
The
perfect.
one that you
That
were talking about. Well,
that
anyway, Bob,
okay,
thank you so much for
and
being on. Rob, thank you for coming on and co-hosting this with me as well.
Appreciate it.
To everyone else, I just want to say, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, let me go ahead and encourage you to do that. And we'll have many more great videos and podcasts coming up in the future.
and
Have a great day.
thank you guys for having me. And
You're welcome.
Thank you.
okay.